How does the saying go? Absence makes the heart grow fonder? Well, that seems to hold true for at least one feature from past Smash games that didn't make it into Ultimate. Custom specials from Smash 4, a thing where every playable fighter in the base game had unlockable alternate versions of their B-button moves, gave a fresh new perspective to characters' movesets and let players alter the fighting styles of their favorites. Well, on paper, anyway. In practice, customs in Smash 4 were pretty awkwardly handled. Unlocking the ones you wanted was a royal pain in the ass, and several of them felt like the balancing team never got around to checking on them. And yet, despite the hang-ups, this is one feature that a lot of fans missed when it turned out not to be returning. So, what if they did get a new lease on life at some point in the future? While it's far too late for it to happen in this game, especially with the ridiculous undertaking it'd be to program them for over 80 different characters, we can still wonder what custom specials might be like if they ever came back. Let's take a look at what such a revamp could look like for 4 of Ultimate's fighters, both old veterans whose customs from Smash 4 could use a touch-up, and someone newer who never had the chance to get any of their own. For this revamped take on the concept, I've designed them a little differently than Smash 4 did. Instead of 2 alts per special move, I've narrowed it down to 1 alternate with more thought put into them. A lot of Smash 4s felt kinda cookie cutter because they needed to come up with 2 for every move, so this lightens the load and lets us make each variant as interesting as possible. That said, these will still be variants and not completely new moves entirely. I do want to stick to the framework Smash 4 used and start with the same basic animations at least, because I think there's an appeal to creating a different take on something people are already familiar with. That and cramming 8 completely different specials onto every character would run the risk of leaving their movesets a cluttered mess. Not everyone needs to be the Mii fighters, you know? But our versions will be more directly inspired by the source material than most of Smash 4's customs were. I want to use these to not only offer different takes on special moves, but also highlight stuff that the character's default movesets weren't able to. I want to design these with a purpose, to feel like a natural extension of their canon abilities and not just some gimmick. And the more visually distinct they are, the better. Overall, we'll be aiming for something like the customs Mega Man had. Let's see if we can measure up to that. Seemed like the previous episode did a good job with it, so here goes nothing. Oh, and if you did like that video, or you end up liking this one too, can you do me a solid and subscribe and click the little notification icon so you know when more videos happen? Notice the last episode got a lot of attention from people who don't already follow me. So can you help me out by subscribing so the algorithms notice and start giving a damn? And that way you also wouldn't have to worry about missing a new video when it's out. But enough of that. Let's begin. And who better to begin with? Mr. Video Game himself has always been easy to pick up and play as, to where some have claimed since Smash 4 that all you gotta do with him is mash A until you win. But the alternate versions of his B-button moves turned out disappointingly paint by numbers. Let's see if we can liven him up a little with our own set of customs that also pulls from parts of his storied history that his current moveset doesn't. First, the classic Fireball is a standard by which many other projectiles of its archetype are judged. Shame that the custom versions of it in Smash 4 were the cliché faster but weaker and stronger but laggier shtick, just with the latter also being big and multi-hit. So what if we could give him something that behaves completely differently in the form of a completely different projectile? Enter a callback all the way to Super Mario Land. Instead of a fireball, Mario would toss a strange gray ball that'd come down in a straight diagonal angle, and instead of obeying gravity, once it hits a surface it'd ricochet off and keep going in that direction instead for a while. With a bit faster movement on the ball but more end lag, it'd let you poke at opponents from different angles than the standard fireball can, and even let you contest recoveries in different ways. It'd probably also lead to low-level Marios trying to camp with full-hop super balls, which would only work until their opponent realized they could just run under him and punish. Mario's Cape is another classic and rather infamous move. Getting caught by it at the wrong times while recovering true combos into throwing your controller in frustration. But what if you, as Mario, wanted a version with more direct combat use? Enter an alternate cape with a brown and black pattern inspired by the Tanooki suit. A bigger hitbox from twirling this cape lets you actually space with it at times, and using it in midair actually stalls Mario's descent strongly enough to be a legitimate landing mix-up. But it only blocks projectiles instead of reflecting them, and hitting someone with it merely deals moderate knockback instead of reversing their momentum. Could see this one being useful against characters who don't rely on projectiles, or who have flexible recoveries that aren't vulnerable to getting turned around. The Super Jump Punch is a quick recovery move, punish, or combo finisher that's probably a low-key reference to the original Dragon Punch, which I bet looks really obvious in hindsight, huh? So how do we give this one a good variant? How about we have it knock red coins out of people instead? Mario would hesitate a bit longer at the start, then launch into an uppercut that goes further and deals 8 hits total, knocking a red coin loose with each hit, complete with a little fanfare for when you collect every red coin in a level in some titles. While the greater startup means it's less useful as a punish or combo finisher, it's a better recovery move and deals greater damage and knockback. Could technically kill off the top earlier, but you'd have to get a read with it since it wouldn't true combo from an up air anymore. And then there's F.L.U.D, by far the strangest part of Mario's kit, with a win box that can be frustrating for opponents off stage since it pushes them around without interrupting any recovery moves in progress. But sometimes you just want a nice damage dealer instead. For that, how about we tap into the spread shot you can get in Sunshine if you press R plus A when you're in midair? Our Smash version would unleash that blast immediately in front of you for significant damage and knockback. A custom that trades edge guarding ability for pure burst damage, the lack of win box makes it less effective at screwing up recoveries, but in exchange you gain a strong punish or mix-up that even gives you an aerial kill move. As long as you remember to prep it ahead of time, at least. Now for someone who's gained a reputation as of late. Brushed off early on competitively, Mr. Game & Watch has risen to the spotlight since and very quickly become one of many people's least favorite characters to fight against. But what if we could give him a set of alternate specials that both make him more tolerable to deal with and double as a clever reference to his source material? Because you see, nearly every Game & Watch title had a normal mode titled Game A and a harder mode named Game B that also usually changed up gameplay somehow. So how about we use that? Chef is ordinarily kinda awkward to use and easy to work around, unless you're trying to recover and he's standing there at the ledge flipping sausages and other food items at you and hitting you out of your recovery and your get-up options. Well, Game B in the original Chef game adds one more piece of food to keep airborne, making it easier to lose track of everything, but also letting you rack up points faster. Smash could interpret that by having Mr. Game & Watch flip 2 pieces of food at once, at the cost of being vulnerable more often, with a gap between every second flip instead of every fifth like the default version. More hitboxes thrown at once would allow for better coverage in the short term, but since there's more lulls in the action, it's inherently more risky to use as well. Judge is weird. Hard to hit in most situations, more likely to harm yourself or do something weak than it is to, well, you know. Our alternate version is designed more to directly challenge an opposing attack, because, believe it or not, the original Judge's Game B is multiplayer. Instead of a host of different effects, Judge B would deal a single hit of varying power based on the number drawn. You'd also gain damage-based armor to protect you from any attacks weaker than that of the attack generated by the number you get. It's a weird half-counter of sorts designed to convey the feeling of two-player Judge. Do you try to attack and hope you get a high enough number to overpower your opponent? Or do you back off and wait to punish instead? You could technically recreate the game in Smash with this thing. The game's Fire and Parachute combine for Mr. Game & Watch's up special, merging long-distance recovery with one of the best out-of-shield attacks in the game. So how do we make an alt for this that's actually worth using over the original? Fire's Game B has escapees jump from a lower floor of the building sometimes, and in Parachute's Game B, the paratroopers can get hung up on palm trees sometimes that delay their landing. Borrowing concepts from both, Mr. Game & Watch wouldn't get bounced as high up, and with worse knockback on the trampoline, but he'd be able to act sooner afterward, and instead of the parachute being a one-and-done deal, you'd be able to close and reopen it just like Peach's parasol. This would give him even more movement mix-ups when trying to land, helpful if you keep getting juggled. So, what do we do with Oil Panic? The infamous bucket is plenty strong on its own, and it doesn't help that Game B in the original Oil Panic doesn't have any bells or whistles, it just starts out harder. Well, that does mean your bucket tops off more often, so Oil Panic B could give you an easier time filling the bucket, with a threshold for gaining multiple segments from one projectile made lower. Which sounds like a strict nerf, except there'd be a slightly higher damage multiplier on the projectiles you catch to compensate. And once the bucket is full, 2 splashes of oil are thrown instead of just 1, making the hitbox last longer. Ironically, a variant based on the game's hard mode would actually be more stable and user-friendly. You know, for how big a threat Ganondorf is in canon, he just can't seem to stick that in Smash. Despite overwhelming power, despite being pretty popular to use online, despite the significant buffs he's gained in Ultimate, he just can't seem to end up any better than mediocre. Well, how about we set him up with some customs that give him some versatility within his whole playstyle of having to work hard to approach but destroying people when he gets the upper hand. Let's start with Warlock Punch. Despite being able to damn near one-hit KO if it connects, it's such an absurd commitment that you're basically only ever hitting it if you manage to break someone's shield. Maybe we could offer a variant that's less super situational? We can even throw in a reference. Instead of infusing his fist with dark magic, this version has him form the darkness into the shape of a trident and lunge ahead with it. Boasting more range, burst movement, and significantly faster startup, the Demon's Trident would have actual use as a not-so-hard read or landing trap. But since the magic is less focused, it also wouldn't be nearly as strong. though not as strong by Ganondorf's standards, still means can kill it like 100. While Warlock Punch isn't thrown out often outside of free-for-alls, Flame Choke does get a lot of use as a command grab that deals a big hit and sets up tech chases. But what about something built more for pure damage? Instead of a single hit, this version of the grab has Ganondorf hold his opponent in place and engulf them in dark magic repeatedly. The more you mash, the more hits you inflict before a final blast that sends them flying forward instead of straight down. Smothering Shadows trades tech chases for pure damage and eventually a KO option outright if you're near the ledge. Oh, and using it in midair would still have it deal multiple hits as you fell, but opponents would be able to escape more quickly than if they're on the ground. Ganondorf's recovery leaves something to be desired. Some aspects of Dark Dive do more harm than good, like somehow getting punished for landing it if your opponent techs off the side of the stage. So how about an alternate that works differently? Our new version would start with having him float in place for a short time as he gathers dark magic. Moving left or right would even let him drift a little. Then he'd go into the rising animation and travel further than the original version, shrouded in darkness that damages anyone who touches him. A more traditional recovery, sort of. Dark Rising is more about recovering safely while harming anyone who tries to stop you. That said, you're wide open at the start, the rising part is more rigid, and there's less disjoint on the dark magic than the regular version's grab has. Wizard's Foot has always been kind of awkward, and Ultimate's version is no exception. Despite its ability to clank with weaker projectiles, zoning has still been a serious issue for the big guy. So how about an alternate version that directly helps him get in if he's already made it most of the way? Increased startup would lead into a kick cloaked in a fell reddish-violet magic that is much bigger visually. And it's not just for show. With more disjoint and even greater power, it can trample right through weaker projectiles. Giving Ganondorf an outright zone-breaking tool would be a huge help in an area he struggles so much in, but he'd still have to get to a dash length away for it to hit, read when to go for a call-out with it due to its startup, and not get shielded and punished. Knowing when to use it and when to resist the urge would be key. Last but not least, we end with someone whose moveset is tragic. After a massive Smash Ballot campaign and years of support, Banjo and Kazooie made their return to Nintendo in triumphant fashion. Yet their moveset, so carefully crafted to feel so true to their games, had the unfortunate side effect of giving them a fighting style that was, in the eyes of many, thoroughly unpleasant both to play as and against. But perhaps the right set of custom specials could help alleviate that while also pulling from even more of their repertoire. We start with the big source of the complaints, a multi-purpose zoning tool that accidentally contributed to their neutral being among the campiest and slowest paced of the entire cast. But all it'd take to have the option to turn their game plan into something more dynamic is a different type of egg. The fire eggs from Banjo-Tooie would deal a little more damage per hit and travel further with more velocity. But unlike the standard eggs, they wouldn't bounce, breaking on contact with the first surface they touch. This combination, along with increased end lag, would make them much less effective at walling opponents out, geared more toward poking at them and dealing chip damage to open them up for the Baron Bird to fight more proactively. A cool idea on paper, Wonderwing's hard-hitting invincible burst movement has rapidly put it near the top of many players' most hated moves list. And auto-losing to grabs and being limited to 5 uses per stock haven't done much to keep it in check. An alt version would need to have its own strengths to be worth using. Like, say, something more defensive the way the move actually works in their games. Instead of an immediate charge, holding B here has the duo brace themselves and tank any attacks that touch them. Then charge ahead a dash length to counter once you let go. Sort of a hybrid of the current Wonderwing and Joker's Rebel's Guard, this version's armor would kick in earlier than the default's frame 18, letting you shut down opposing aggression more easily. Well, as long as you don't get grabbed, it'd still lose to those. Shock Spring Jump is weird. Mostly a vertical-only recovery with a hitbox only on the pad you spring from. It has the upside of not putting the pair into freefall, which is good, because they're kind of reliant on Wonderwing to cover horizontal distance and we just made that optional. But what if they could choose to use a different move to recover instead? Summoning a generic-looking pad to stand on, they'd perform the backflip from their first 2 games. This move would go further, have more lateral movement on it, and even have a hitbox on them as they ascend, but at the cost of them going into freefall afterward. Less flexible, but more effective on its own. And yeah, I know it violates the keep the same base animation thing, but it worked too well to pass up. Finally, we have the other reason why the duo's neutral is so contentious. With an explosive item on command that can also be reversed to put up a temporary wall, grenade eggs are not very well liked. So just like the neutral special, how about an alt that swaps in a different egg type from Banjo-Tooie? Instead of a live grenade, Kazooie lays an egg that hatches into a tiny clockwork version of herself. Don't think too hard about it. Upon hatching, the Clockwork Kazooie would march forward on its own at moderately high speed until it hits something, and then blows up, or runs off the stage or platform, which deactivates it and makes it only do a weak hit instead. Instead of a weird campy setup tool, this version's more for horizontal stage control. Send your clockwork likeness out to force opponents to move, and then try to punish whatever you think they'll do in response. So, not bad, huh? This is my personal take on what custom specials could be like for these 4 fighters if the mechanic were to ever come back. I may not have the programming ability to make any of these happen for real, but hey, coming up with stuff like this is pretty fun, right? Though if any of you are skilled enough to actually make these happen, I'd be interested to see. It took a while, but hey, I promised I'd follow up that first episode after how well it did, and here we are. And I wouldn't mind doing even more of these. So let's hear it. Which characters would you want to see me create these revamped custom specials for next? Anyone who comes to mind? Special thanks to these nice people for helping make this video happen, especially my patrons for continuing to prop me up with how chaotic things are right now. Seriously, it means a lot to me that you think I've earned that. So, until next time, maybe I could use a custom special that lets me put these videos out with less lag between them.